Hi, everyone. I'm Greg McGruder, a member of the board of directors for the DC Environmental Film Festival, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this chat about the film you just saw, The Falconer. Joining me are the film's director, Annie Kaempfer, the Falconer himself, Rodney Stotts, and we're also joined by Akiima Price, who appeared in the film and who works as a contractor with National Parks Foundation, connecting communities surrounding Washington's Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens in Anacostia Park, both of the National Capital Parks East. And finally, we have with us Corina Newsome, an ornithologist, a birder, a science communicator. She's a grad student at Georgia Southern University. And in response to the racism faced by Black birder Christian Cooper in Central Park last year, Corina co-organized Black Birders Week to celebrate Black birders. So welcome to all of you. So first off, tell me where you all are. So let's go with Annie. Tell us where you are.
I am in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay. And Akiima, tell us where you're joining us from.
I'm in Brookland, Washington, D.C.
Brookland, Washington, D.C. Okay. And Rodney, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you guys from Laurel, Maryland.
Okay. And Corina, you are joining us from where?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay. The ATL. So Annie, I've got a first question. We're going to start off with you. You began your film career here in your hometown of Washington, D.C. at the Environmental Film Festival, and you now serve on the festival's board. You received an MFA from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts in 2016. Tell us how it was you found this story, how you found Rodney, and why you thought that you needed to tell this story.
Well, my aunt actually met Rodney at an environmental film festival screening of falconry shorts back in 2013. And Rodney was there with a bird, and she went and talked to him and got his card, and I met Rodney that way, and he was nice enough to tell me about all the plans he had surrounding the hope to build a bird sanctuary out at Oak Hill, but also about his own personal work that he does teaching raptor education and falconry to anybody who is interested in learning.
Okay. Now, you say that this film is a story documenting second chances. What do you mean by that?
Well, I see a real second chance for some of the birds that appear in the film. They're non-releasable, so they've been injured. And, the choice at that point would be to euthanize them or to use them for educational programs. So they're having a second chance being part of those programs that Rodney does. I also think that, the land itself out at Oak Hill, this is a real second chance for that place. It originally was a mental hospital way back in the day, then a juvenile prison. Now what we show in the film, Rodney is building something hopeful there. So it was a second chance in that way. And then I think also a second chance for the cadets at the National Guard Academy who got the opportunity to connect with Rodney and with his birds, with nature, and for Rodney himself as well.
Yeah. Rodney, I thought this was an amazing story. And one thing that I was intrigued about, if anyone is a fan of the film festival, they certainly saw the film Endangered Species, which was created by Bob Nixon, who was in the film in 2004, the story of the Earth Conservation Corps and how the Earth Conservation Corps, an organization that you are strongly connected with, Rodney, played a major role in cleaning up the Anacostia River. Talk about that, Annie, that connection and why you felt you needed that this story had another chapter, additional chapters.
Well, I think that, a lot of people, especially in the Washington area, do know the story of the Earth Conservation Corps cadet first group back in the early 90s that Rodney was part of that first cohort cleaning up the Anacostia River in order to eventually make it clean enough that the bald eagle could return to Washington, D.C. But I think that there are also lots of people who don't know that story, and don't know that the bald eagle in fact left the nation's capital because the water was so polluted and they couldn't reproduce any longer. Their eggshells would be so thin that they couldn't incubate their eggs. The shells would crack, and it was because of all the pollution. So I just thought that that story is so fantastic, and more people could know about it, but also that what Rodney is doing personally, outside of Earth Conservation Corps is also so inspiring and so fantastic. And I think it's quite unusual to have someone who's doing really important work that's not necessarily through an organization, right? So Rodney is just as likely to educate someone about birds if he runs into someone in a local park. He'll spend an hour answering someone's questions. It doesn't matter if they're a child in a program where he's being paid to be there, or just a person who walks by. And I think that's so special and so important, and I really wanted to show that as well.
Okay, so this film is for, or question is for Corina and for Akiima. So this film, how do you think you can use this film in the work that you do? I mean, both you are interested in connecting people with the outdoors. And there are challenges to that, in so many different ways. Is this film something that you can use to support your work, continue to tell that story of what it is you do? Akiima, you go first.
Okay.
Akiima, you go first.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of parallels between Rodney and the communities I serve. These people can look at this film and see themselves. A lot of points that Rodney made about his story, especially around, the police and all these other things, are very relatable. Again, because I'm in Washington, D.C., them seeing, actual D.C. locations. So that would be relatable there as well. But I think anybody that's working with folks, stressed folks, and trying to engage them in nature, this kind of makes the case for yet another level of relatability, right? So whether it's, seeing Rodney as a falconer as a career, a lot of people would imagine that that's not even a career. They may not even understand falconry. So to learn about falconry from the voice of someone like Rodney, I think kind of solidifies a connection where you don't always feel like, oh, that's them, or I have to go to college to be that, or, I feel like there's so many different points that resonate with any human, but especially stressed populations that I focus on.
That's an interesting phrase, stressed populations, and it's so wonderfully kind of describes the reality of so many people's lives. So Corina, how about you?
Kind of following what Akiima said, a lot of times in my experience as a biologist and as someone who loves birds and was seeking out ways to learn about the natural world, I felt like I was chasing a narrative that I wasn't part of, that I was not only not represented in, but just simply didn't include anything about me or my history or the context in which I grew up and lived. And to see Rodney's story, I tell you, like the first scene, Rodney, when you were releasing that, I think Red-tailed Hawk that you had that season, I cried because I was like, this is the first time where I'm seeing something like falconry, which in my experience has been 100% white. I've never seen a black falconer in my life until Rodney. And all of a sudden I saw my story there, right? And it's like, you need more than just exposure to it, right? Exposure is very important and it's helpful. Education from anyone is helpful. And that's how I got here, right? But to see my story represented in Rodney's story and to see his story intersect with the work he does with birds, like the intersectionality of it all was revolutionary to me. And I'm like, had I seen this when I was, 10, 12, and I was kind of building my interest in the outdoors and in wildlife, and someone who grew up in inner city Philadelphia, where there's huge police presence, right? Huge, drug presence. Like that would have changed everything for me, because I didn't think the things that I loved to do and were interested in happened where I was, but they do. And Rodney is a living, active example of that. And so it is, in fact, central. Stories like Rodney's are central to the work that I do and want to continue to do.
So, Corina, thank you. So you said something very interesting. That release of the hawk made you cry. And Annie, isn't that the goal of every filmmaker?
To laugh and to cry, right?
Yeah, laugh and to cry. And fortunately, you're able to do that with Rodney. So Rodney, a master falconer. And, I love the title of this, The Falconer. It just has this kind of oomph to it that no one else can achieve. I almost think "the" should be all capitalized, Rodney. So Rodney, you are a master at giving adults and kids of all ages the experience, the excitement of holding a live bird of prey, and you're a master at connecting young people to their communities. And I think, some of the best films also, Annie and Rodney, they kind of revealed something about the main character. And there were some points I felt I was sitting in on a psychology section with you and your therapist. So Rodney, thank you for being so revealing to all of us. So one question I have that's kind of related, and maybe it's something that Annie and Rodney can answer. Throughout the film, Rodney, it's very clear that music plays a major role in your life. So if you had to do a playlist of music that was driving you, what would be the top song on that list?
Wow. Probably Bob Marley's Get Up, Stand Up.
I kind of figured it was going to be Bob Marley, because that was a fascinating presence in the film. So since the film was done, Rodney, there have been a lot of changes. So tell me what's going on with you and your passion for falconry now.
Well, one of the major changes is, instead of building a sanctuary in Laurel, I actually was able to acquire some property down in Charlotte Courthouse, Virginia. So I'm in the process of doing what's called Dippy's Dream. My mom, her nickname was Dippy. She used to always say she wanted a place where her kids and their grandkids and everyone could just come, hang out, relax, garden. So she grew up on a farm, so she wanted to have that whole experience. So she passed away a few years ago before I was able to get the house. So now I'm actually doing a sanctuary there, and it'll be called Dippy's Dream. And it's for anyone, as long as you can get there, it's free. You can come out and camp, ride horses, because I have horses also. I do a program called Healing with Hawks and Horses. It's just animals themselves, brings an incredible healing to you. I don't care what's going on. I don't care what's wrong. Something about that animal just being there, even down to a goldfish, just watching them swim, it can just calm you. It just takes you somewhere else. So I want people to be able to come out and enjoy. And whatever you can afford, then you donate. If you can't afford, because you can't afford something, doesn't mean you don't deserve it. So for those people who can't afford something, well, you deserve to have a spot that you can come out and camp and bring your kids and teach them about nature and see the birds and ride. You can get up every morning and feed the homeless, and almost homeless yourself. So does that mean you don't deserve something? No, it just means you couldn't afford it. So my biggest change is getting the property out there up and going. I have 7 acres that I'm clearing land and building kennels and everything to bring the horses out. So hopefully by the end of this year, Dippy's Dream will be up and running.
And how can people find out more about Dippy's Dream?
They can go on rodneysraptors.webs.com. They can contact me directly. I'd love to sit down and talk with them and explain the vision, and hopefully they can come in and help out.
So Rodney, I have a suggestion. So you've got a director who created a film about you. I think you need to find a publisher to put together the sayings of Rodney Stotts. Akiima.
Actually, there's a book coming out next year. I actually have a book coming out next year called Bird Brother. It's about me being a falconer. So I do have a publisher and a book coming out also.
All right. Okay, but then you can have another book with just your saying. So
Yes,
I
sir.
guess my question about you to you, when I hear you speak, Rodney, you sound like my grandfather. There is this kind of wisdom that is beyond your years. So how did you get so wise, and how did you get to the point that people spend years in therapy to realize, to become aware of themselves? Talk about your journey to that point.
Honestly, I believe all of where I am today come from my mom. She used to always tell me, never be ashamed of your past, because that's what it is, your past. You can make things different. You're not what you've done unless you continue to do the same thing. So if you made a mistake, clean it up and keep going. I used to watch my mom. She used drugs my whole life. I walked in her house one day. My mom had everything on her table. I said, Mom, what's wrong with you? She said, I don't want this anymore. I said, well, quit. She said, what, you think I can't stop? And for almost 30 years before my mom passed away, she never did another drug, cigarette, drink, anything. So to sit back and watch her and see that demon she overcame, everything else that you do is an excuse. If you make anything else, it's an excuse. It's a crutch. So she used to always tell me, if you want to be better, do better. If you know better, do better. You'll hear men say, grown men don't do this, and men don't do that. And you'll watch them turn around and do exactly what they said men don't do. So they're a hypocrite. My mom said, don't be a hypocrite. So that's what I try my hardest to do. Do I make mistakes? Every day. Do I try to correct them? Yes. And I've learned to accept people for their mistakes. She used to always tell me, you can never ask for forgiveness if you don't know how to forgive yourself. So I just learned how to forgive.
So Rodney, I think you might think about opening the Falconer Church as well. Because it's like, preach. Can we get a witness? So one question I have of all of you, everyone who is part of this conversation has been involved with connecting Black people with the outdoors in some way. So, just given all the incidents that we experienced last year, Christian Cooper in Central Park, the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and that murder of Arbery, Corina, took place not far from your research site. And, we also are in the middle of a pandemic. And so all these things have kind of, I think, made us realize the importance of the work that all of you do. I mean, do you feel that way too, that there is this greater sense of urgency to connect everybody with the outdoors?
I
Karina, you
think there's,
go first. Oh, I'm sorry. Kima, you go.
I was just going to say, I think there's an urgency around mental health, an awareness and a ownership of the fact that people need mental health support. And I do think because of the options of places to go, people have been finding solace in parks more. And so for my 30-year experience, which actually, part of my start was with Rodney, watching Rodney grow and come through the Earth Conservation Corps, it is full circle. It's kind of like, I don't want to be like, I told you so, but there's people coming to me now, like, even with diversity and inclusion, like everybody's got that on the tip of their tongue still, right? So I do think this is a prime time for us to further manifest what we've always believed and known to be our purposes. And so, yeah, it's a great time, but I also, I'm from the school of, don't just let this be a fad. Like, how does this reprogram your behaviors and how you treat people and just your respect for even the outdoors, when you start to appreciate things more and or see things modeled in other people. That's, to me, I would love to see this continue on, but actual be different behavior change and not just a passing fad.
And Akiima, how can people find out more about the work that you do with the parks?
I actually have a better presence I have a group called the Urban EE Collective on Facebook. And it's a network of almost 3,000, maybe a little over that, of people of color, but, people of all backgrounds, but people who identify the fact that environment is not always trees and grass, that you have to consider the social issues, you have to consider, yourself as a human and how you treat people and what you think of people. So there's a lot of opportunities for people to learn more about race and hear more from the perspective of African Americans that have been in this field for so long. Like when I was doing environmental education, I endured a lot of racism because the typical mindset for people in conservation were middle income, high income people who had land, so that perspective was completely different. And people didn't want to respect it. I was trying to tell people back in the 90s, the early 90s, crack is an environmental issue, and when you don't allow those conversations to happen, you create this cipher, and it just was, homogenous of the same people. And so I'm glad to see now that we've cracked the show. I do think that there's no turning back on that. But to the long answer for your quick question of how to reach me would be the Urban EE Collective, because I'm an experience. It's not something you can necessarily read on the website.
Okay. And Corina, the question about the sense of urgency.
So I think there is urgency on multiple levels, and one of which is, as Akiima said, when it comes to just health and wellness, the way that people suffer when they don't have that connection to the world around them. And again, outside, outdoors is anywhere, is everywhere. Our environment is everywhere we exist. And there are so many ways in which the environments that stress populations, as Akiima put it, live, it negatively impacts mental health, but it also negatively impacts physical health. And there are intersections with that, even in seeing Rodney's work, right, and cleaning up the river where he was, and of course, helped save bald eagles, but that helps save people too. And I think there's a lot of, and I use this word a lot, intersectionality when it comes to the solutions to the environmental emergencies that we find ourselves in. And one of the things that frustrates me about the world of wildlife conservation, which is what I work in, is that there is often this very siloed and kind of unilateral, uni-perspective mechanism for solving problems that are environmental in nature or related to wildlife, and thinking, okay, we have to be very singular in our efforts. And it's like, no, you actually have to center the perspectives and the leadership and the knowledge of the people who are closest to the pain. And Representative Ayanna Pressley in Congress, she has a phrase where she said that the people who are closest to the pain should be closest to the power. They should be in power, right? And so when you set people up to understand the world that they live in, right? When you have people like Rodney who allow people who have usually been excluded from the realm of decision-making and engagement when it comes to natural resources and when it comes to wildlife and the outdoors, right? When you have representatives like him, people can now see themselves in the story. Then they can see themselves making decisions and in power. And when we change the power dynamic, the people who are making the decisions, the people who are guiding strategies, then we can address these emergencies, these environmental emergencies, these health emergencies, these societal emergencies, all of which intersect directly with one another. And so it's so critical that people like Rodney are in positions of influence, are in positions of decision-making, and being able to touch as many people and communities as possible, so that we can address very holistically a lot of the challenges that the most vulnerable populations in our country and around the world are facing. Okay.
And we're gonna wind up now, but I do want Annie, you to answer that question too. Just the time that we're in now, and this film and the issue of connecting Black folks with the outdoors.
Yeah, well, I think that, I'm sort of in the process of formulating an impact campaign for the film. And as part of that process, I asked Rodney recently, what his goal is for the film. And he said for more Black people to learn about falconry as an option and potentially to become falconers. And so I think that that's really something that I got really energized by, and I love the idea of making my goal for the film's impact Rodney's goal. And I see the film as Rodney can only meet so many people in a day. He can only be in one place at a time. And I just hope that the film can serve as an extension of him and of his work and his passion. And, when people see Rodney and the birds and get the chance to interact with him, like, you just see the light go on in their eyes, and it's just so magical. And I hope that the film can do that as well. So we've got some plans coming up around that. We're going to do a bunch of screenings, try and have the film available to the organizations doing the work on the ground so that they can use the film as a tool to strengthen their own work, moving the needle on these issues. And yeah, so the film's website, thefalconerfilm.com, there'll be more information there in the coming weeks and months. So if people sign up for the newsletter or just check back on the website, they'll find out some more.
Great. So Rodney, we're going to wind up with you answering that question. I mean, do you feel this sense of urgency right at the moment? I mean, it's almost like the rest of the world has caught up with you.
Well, I don't feel like there's a sense of urgency. Like you said, I've been feeling that way. So I've been feeling that way all this time. And like you said, it's kind of like they're catching up. However, I'm another 5-6 steps further now because like I said, I've been preaching this for so long and doing it for so long and not, I don't want to say getting the attention for it or anything because it's not what that's for. However, now people are starting to see what I've been doing, the way that it has helped and healed some along the way, and that it can potentially do the same for them also if you just open up. This has changed a lot of people's, like you said, thinking. You had time to really sit back and reflect on yourself. So if you really want to better yourself, open up and do something different. And this is it.
So we've got contact information from all of you except Corina. So if people want to know about Black Birders Week, when does that happen and how can they find out about it?
So I would encourage folks who are interested in following along with Black Birders Week to follow the group that organizes it. They're called Black AF in STEM. And so you can follow them on Twitter and on Instagram, and you'll see all the updates and upcoming announcements about Black Birders Week on social media.
All right, so clearly we have a lot of passionate people in this conversation, from Annie, who has made filmmaking and storytelling her life work. We've got Rodney, the Falconer, and that's all capital the. Right? We've got Akiima Price, who's doing it here in DC, and we have Corina, who is doing it for the birds. I want to thank all of you for joining us in this conversation today. And I wish we could talk. I mean, I had a lot more questions to ask of you, but such is life. This was a lot of fun, and I appreciate your joining me. And I encourage everyone who's watching this to make sure that you go and see more films, especially films by the DC Environmental Film Festival. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.